So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Melanie Escher with the Arizona Telemedicine Program, and welcome to today's webinar session, Changing the Paradigm, Justice in the Community Food System for Growers, Suppliers, and Consumers. So for all of the University of Arizona, Tucson faculty residence fellows, here's a QR code for DEI credit. If you'd like to do this session, you can go ahead and take a picture with your phone. I do have another slide at the end, and I will put the URL link in the chat when I am done with this. So you don't have to rush to get it out right now. There will be another one. So this series is Improving Access to Quality Medical Care webinar series, and it's brought to you by the Arizona Telemedicine Program, the Southwest Telehealth Resource Center, the National Reach Coalition, the University of Arizona, Melanie Zuckerman College of Public Health, and Asian Media Access. Here at the University of Arizona, we respectfully acknowledge the University of Arizona is on the land and territories of Indigenous peoples. Today, Arizona is home to 22 federally recognized tribes, with Tucson being home to the O'odham and the Yaqui. Committed to diversity and inclusion, the university strives to build sustainable relationships with sovereign Native nations and Indigenous communities through education offerings, partnerships, and community service. Again, welcome everybody. Just a couple little tips. When you were connected today, your phone or your computer microphone were muted. You can use the Q&A if you have any, the chat function for any questions that you'd like. We do have a post-webinar evaluation or survey that will pop up in a different window behind when we're done. Like I said before, the webinar is being recorded, and I will put this URL for our previous website, our previous webinars on our website, so that you can get access to that later. Go to the next screen. And again, this is our main website for upcoming webinars and events. This is the evaluation link, and it will be put it into the chat later as well. And then I got one more slide for the DEI credit for the QR code if anybody wants to grab that real quick, but I will put the URL in the chat that you can click on directly. And without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce to you Charmaine Ruddock. She is with the National Reach Coalition, and then she will go ahead and let you know about our panelists today. Charmaine?
Thank you so much, Melanie. On behalf of the National Reach Coalition, I want to welcome you all to the second in our series, Changing the Paradigm, Justice in the Community Food System for Growers, Suppliers, and Consumers. Before we get into what I envision will be a fantastic discussion with a group of individuals who have been working in this area, giving a lot of thought, drawing on their experiences, their knowledge, etc. It would be remiss if we did not thank the University of Arizona for being partners in going back 2-3 years in the National Reach Coalition, having these kind of discussions that we intend to be part of this movement to eliminate racial and ethnic health disparities. So the National Reach Coalition, for those who may not know it, is marking its 20th year this year. We started in 2004. A set of grantees that the CDC had funded as part of its REACH initiative, which stands for Racial and Ethnic Approaches to Community Health. As grantees, we wanted to make sure that the communities that were represented, that CDC had funded to address racial and ethnic health disparities and to promote health equity, were not just grantees, but needed to be part of the larger discussion that is taking place about how do we really have the kind of impact necessary to establish health equity. And so in those 20 years, we have been forging ahead, bringing the kind of conversation we're going to have today, going and talking to elected officials, both locally as well as on Capitol Hill. This current series on food justice came about because one of the REACH grantees asked us after the last webinar series which we had, which was called um, Changing the Paradigm, Those Who Tell the Stories Shape Their Destiny. The panelists came to us and said, the grantee came to us and said, a concern that they have um, was how food justice was being addressed, how different communities were experiencing food justice, and could we come together, share those experiences, and then see if we can strive to think about, put in place, advocate for the kind of policies, the kind of initiatives that will have substantial improvement in the food systems. And so with that, today we are going to we're going to have folks, as I just mentioned, who will draw on their experience, share their experiences with us, talk about um, what changing the paradigm in terms of food justice should look like. And so I'm going to start off by calling on them. They'll introduce themselves, talk a little bit about who they are, what they do, why they got into the business of food justice. And I'm going to start off with Dana Hewenkorn, who's a food sovereignty program manager at Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes. Dana?
Hello, Kisuk Kiukiet, Hukaklik Dana Hiwankorn, and I am a member of the Confederate Salish and Kootenai tribes, and my tribal affiliation is Kootenai. And we're here in northwestern Montana, and my tribe 2 years ago or 2 or 3 years ago made a resolution, and they made 8 important resolutions to kind of be our guiding path to what they wanted all of us to work on. And one of them was food security. We learned kind of through COVID that how really fragile our food system was. And they were doing some work on food sovereignty prior to that, but not just kind of figuring it out a little bit. But when COVID hit, we really, really learned how absolutely fragile our system was. So they got us into place, and we started working from there. I've been doing this position for 2 years, and we've grown significantly from 1 person to 6 people. And then last year we did gardens, and we grew 8 tons of food out of 7 community gardens. So collectively we grew 8 tons of food. This year we entered into the REACH grant, so that's going to be very helpful for us to have a place for all that food to go. And I got into this field completely by accident. I grew a garden and got really good at it, and it grew from there. And now I'm this manager for this project, so it's really fun. I have a master's in travel administration governance and a BA in travel historic preservation, and nowhere on there does it say anything about agriculture or gardening, but here I am, and I want to make a difference for the people that I serve.
Thank you, Dana, for that introduction. And welcome again to the National REACH Coalition as a REACH grantee. We look forward to continuing this partnership as grantees. Next, I'm going to ask Michael Cheney, who's the founder of Project Sweetie Pie and co-founder of the Family of Trees organization and growing North Minneapolis. Michael?
North Minneapolis is going green. Give us a call and learn what we mean. Where once lie urban blight, now sits luscious garden sites. Gardens without borders, classrooms without walls, architects of our own destinies, access to food, justice for all. And now, like sweet potato vines, our missions and goals all intertwine. Good day, everyone. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I am an activist and an organizer. In the 80s, I was the founder of the Minnesota Juneteenth celebration, spent 18 years working on that project. In the 90s, I was the founder of the Wendell Phillips Credit Union in South Minneapolis, which was an independent community-based credit union. Spent 5 years on that project. And in 2010, when North High, the local high school in North Minneapolis, which is the predominantly African American centered neighborhood, came under attack, there were those who threatened to close the school. I was part of a group called Afro Eco, which was a environmental organization that had many of the um, uh, artists and community leaders were all part of that who had concerns about the environment. We were sitting commiserating about the threat and closing of the school because we knew that the killing of a school is the killing of heart of any community. So we couldn't sit back passively and watch that happen. So I approached the school and asked them if I could get the youth in North Minneapolis to start growing vegetables, could I utilize the abandoned green room that had been sitting fallow for about 15 years. They agreed, and thus Project Sweetie Pie was born. Project Sweetie Pie, the story of a community that came together, worked together for the common good of the youth and families of its community, for it takes a village to raise a child. We're growing good in the neighborhood. Good food, good schools, good youth and families. Education never tasted so good.
Thank you, Michael, for that introduction. Next, Brenda Olivia Sanchez Andrade, who is Border Binational Program Manager, Southeast Arizona Health Education Center. Brenda?
Yeah. Buenas tardes. Hi, everyone. My name is Brenda Sanchez. I have been with Southeast Arizona Health Education Center for the past 5 years. I am also a community health worker working in Southeast Arizona. So that is 6 counties: Pima, Santa Cruz, Graham, Greenlee, and Cochise. My work is predominantly in rural, underserved communities along the borderlands, with a special focus on our agriculture workers. So I oversee all of CHEC's community health worker initiatives. Specifically in Graham and Greenlee, we work with our local food pantries and food banks, providing health education and health screenings to individuals who are using that resource. In Cochise and Santa Cruz County, we work with our agriculture workers, going to their workplace, so farms, to do health education and bring resources to them. And a big role that I play as the program manager is advocacy. Especially during COVID, we saw that agriculture workers, farm workers, many times were our invisible workforce. And during COVID, we saw that without them, our country really could not survive. And so the work that I've been doing for the past few years really came out of the need of advocacy for our agricultural workers. In the state of Arizona, one of the occupations that was most heavily hit by COVID was our agriculture workers. We sadly did lose many of our agriculture workers, our workforce. And so now it's our responsibility to continue to advocate for better working conditions for them, because without them, then we and the rest of the country don't have food on our table. So my work comes as a granddaughter of a agriculture worker. And I've seen firsthand the health effects that come with working in the fields and not having someone advocate for you and your health needs as an agriculture worker.
Then we're going to have Bill Green, who's Executive Director of the Common Market Southeast. Bill?
Good afternoon, everyone. I bring you greetings from Atlanta, Georgia, where I lead the Common Market Southeast as Executive Director. We are a nonprofit food aggregation and distribution company that works to connect small to mid-sized family-owned farms with wholesale selling opportunities. And what that looks like for us is we work with a number of Black and brown farms, immigrant-owned farms, women-owned farms, Our farmers were growing organic before organic was a thing. They were also growing regeneratively before that was a thing. And so the customers that we work with primarily are schools, universities, hospitals, community organizations, early care, senior care centers, who all not only care about sourcing food, not only sourcing local food, but sourcing food that is grown by farmers that are real farmers that have a real story to tell, and also are part of uplifting the local economy. So our work is meant to not only impact local agriculture in the communities where we operate, but also local economies and the environment. And so that is largely the work that we do. We are based in our Mid-Atlantic region, which covers New York down to DC. I lead the Southeast, which is Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Common Market Texas has the great state of Texas. And this year we just opened Great Lakes Common Market based in Chicago, which is Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, and Ohio, I believe. So it's an honor to be a part of this dialogue today. I'm really looking forward to the conversation, sharing a bit of the experience that we have in creating opportunities for small farmers, and yeah, learning from what's working in other regions of the country. So thank you so much. I appreciate the invite.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you all. So, Bill, I ended with you. I'm going to start with you on a question that I'm going to post up all each panelist and ask to respond. What is food injustice, Bill? As far as you are concerned, as far as you see it, the work that you're doing, what is food injustice?
Yeah, so I come to the food justice conversation from a place outside of food. I was raised primarily by my grandparents in a small town called Prospect, Kentucky, and my grandfather shared a story with me when I was very young about how he went to have his car worked on, and when he complained about the service that was provided, he was told that that's all you're going to get because of your color. And the person who told him that used more colorful language than that. But essentially, it was you will get what I give you, and that's all you're going to get. And he left there, went straight to the library, got books on how to work on cars, and from then on, nobody else ever touched his car. He learned how to work on his own car, and that's what he taught me. So when he decided that he wanted to become a horse trainer and owner, he did that, and he learned it himself. He got the resources he needed, and we raced horses. And so, as a child, I remember going to Churchill Downs to race our horses. And back then, he was the only black owner trainer that raced at Churchill Downs. Now there are many others. So when I think about food justice, I think about the empowerment um, of community to be able to control the food that comes into that community. And what that looks like for the common market is we support those efforts by making local food more affordable, and those organizations that are coming together to create purchasing opportunities and distribution opportunities for their communities are places where we find ourselves, because we can not only help with the food itself, we can not only help with transportation, but we can also help with some education. We provide one of the reasons we're a nonprofit is that we raise money to provide additional training for farmers so that they can create greater capacity, business handling acumen, logistics, infrastructure support, and all of this makes food more accessible. But I think at the end of the day, on the farm side, farmers are gaining control over where their food goes, how it's sold, and what price it's sold. And that's better for all of us. That's better for the sustainability of food, and it's better for those organizations that are looking to provide food for people and need to be able to source it from farmers that look like them. So, that's what it looks like for me, and that's where the common market sort of fits in with that.
Prod you a bit, Bill, because that's a very powerful story you just told us of your grandfather. So, injustice in the food system, what are you seeing in the injustice in the food system that has then led you to work on justice in the food system?
Yeah, what I see in terms of injustice is a problem of belief. There are too many people that believe what we have is all we can ever have. The systems that exist are the only systems that can ever exist. That we don't have the budget to support growers or to support food for diverse communities. Um, that the budgets don't exist, and that's just not true. We believe we don't have the time. We believe we don't have the expertise in many cases to get that done. And I think those who control the purse strings have those beliefs by and large. An example I will give is school systems who have said we would love to support diverse growers, but our budgets won't allow it, and that's a belief system. That's a fallacy. Um, we know that there is a short term, there is a cost of food today, but that cost that we're paying does not represent the true cost of food. We had Secretary Vilsack come to our warehouse, and he shared that 2022 was the best year for agriculture in the history of our country. However, 11% of the farms were responsible or gained 92.5% of the revenue. And so we know where those lines fall. That means that 89% of the farmers had to share 7.5% of the revenue. That's not a sustainable model, but it falls into a belief system that we have to support the traditional farms that we've always supported if we're going to feed people. And that's just not true. And so I think that the flip side of that is what we believe is that there are people working in community now to dismantle these older belief systems. And these folks believe, as do we, that we can do more, we can receive less in the short run, and in the long term, our communities will benefit. And so the example that I use there, because I have a grocery background, I was an executive with a grocery company for 18 years, and when we would put stores in communities, the communities would say, we want to have grocery stores. And then we would bring grocery stores into community, but without the education, without the exposure, without the community support, those stores just struggled. And it was hard to continue to support them. But we know that when communities decide we're going to get it done no matter what it costs, nobody can stand in the way. We saw that in the civil rights movement. We saw it in the history of agriculture in this country. We see it in the development of businesses that we're now seeing in Black communities and communities of color. It's a belief system that if we decide that it's going to happen, it's going to happen. Now it won't be quick. Nothing that's good and sustainable happens fast, but it can be done. So that's largely what I'm seeing in terms of food injustice. Is that we just have to change our mindset to understand what's truly possible.
Thank you, Bill. Brenda, what is food injustice? What is the injustice in the food system from your perspective? Because you bring a fantastic perspective. As you said, your grandfather was a farm worker and you're now working. So what is injustice in the food system as you're seeing it?
So the way that I see it and in the work that I do, food injustice is the fact that the individuals who are in the fields picking the produce that we as consumers are buying in the stores, they are living in food deserts and are not able to purchase the produce that they pick because of the inequities of what produce goes to what stores. The community members that I work with, they live in rural Arizona, where their nearest grocery store is 30 minutes away driving. If they don't have a car, they can't get to their grocery store. And even when they do get to their grocery store, the produce that they are buying isn't the produce that they're picking 20 miles away. That produce went to the larger cities, and they're getting the produce that was picked on the opposite end of the state 3 weeks ago. So there's just a lot of injustice with the fact that even when they're trying to buy healthy foods, the cost of a pound of apples at their grocery store is going to be 3 times the price of what I would purchase a pound of apples in the larger city. So again, the people that are picking the food that we're buying can't afford the food that they pick and or just don't have access to it. And to me, that's what food injustice looks like in my communities.
Thank you, Brenda. Michael, what
Yeah.
is food injustice as you're seeing it? And you laid out for us in your introduction a real history of your work. What is food injustice now? What's injustice in the food system as you're seeing it?
Well, I want to take it back further than that, since we are all now just celebrating Juneteenth across this country. Now, as here in Minnesota, a state holiday, as a federal holiday. You know, I've done Juneteenth celebrations Thursday, Friday, Saturday, all day yesterday. We'll do one tomorrow. And it starts for me, it's food injustice starts there, or even more so. When people ask me if I'm a grower, I say, yeah, I grow, but that's not really what I'm doing. They say, well, what are you doing? I say, I'm an ag patriot. I'm using agriculture as a platform, as a forum to really get people civically engaged in their community. Um, Juneteenth, again, I spent over 18 years founding it here, long before it was even on the radar to become a state holiday, let alone a federal holiday. And for those people who in your audience who may or may not know, that Juneteenth was really, I call it the first big media blackout. That the Texans felt that, well, you know, yeah, they may have been liberated, but we don't need to tell them. They can't read. What do they know? You know, let's just keep on pulling the wool over their eyes because it's to our financial benefit. And so for me, time is kind of a um, false illusion that poverty, even though we are under the illusion that we are no longer enslaved, I beg to differ. I say that poverty is indeed slavery, and that in many cases, as then, that we've been left in the dark, kept out of the American dream, not allowed to prosper, kept out of the free enterprise system, socially engineered to be consumers rather than be producers. In a free enterprise system, there's no chance of success. And yet, everybody in America is living off of that single welfare mother who has children. And we are, it's like the movie The Matrix. We are all sucking off of the lifeblood of our people. And that this Western culture is extractive rather than being regenerative, and that we are, rather than being invited into the free American dream, we are living the American nightmare. It's not, I always say that urban farming, local food production is the latest iteration of the civil rights movement. We shouldn't be asking public schools, can we get a contract? We should be demanding it, because it's our tax dollars that are supporting these systems. It's our current tax dollars that's hoisting up this American economy. And yet, even though we are investing our tax dollars, we are not getting our fair, just return. And so consequently, we have this trickle down economy that keeps us hopeless, helpless, and hapless. With Project Sweetie Pie, we have 4 stages. 4 stages. First stage is scattered gardens. The second stage is social media, telling our story. The third stage is season extension, because you can't grow in a broken food system if you can't grow year round and not hit and miss. And the fourth stage is what I call pi squared, green to the second power. And with that, we're looking at green new enterprises. We're looking at workforce development strategies. How can we move forward to really mobilize and energize and bring everybody into the American dream? And unfortunately, they keep many of us in our communities so marginalized, so isolated and insulated, us chasing the police chasing us, that we really haven't been able to come up for air and really think about strategies that are going to move us into the 21st century. And until those of us on this call, until we come together and collaborate and change the paradigm from this top down, academic rhetorical methodology being led by land grant institutions that, again, we are supporting, yet we're not getting a return on our investment, that we have all of these systems that oppose lifting people up and out of poverty, but instead what they've done is they've sealed our feet to the concrete. So how can we come together in collaboration and bringing people who have historically been on the sidelines, how can we bring them to the front lines? Growing food is easing. That's not really our mission here. I would offer to all of us here. Our real mission is growing growers. And if we can continue to build that succession plan and really, to Mr. Green's point, really educate our community, debunk some of the urban myths, some of the biased language. The Green movement has really been an apartheid movement that has really left us on the outside rather than bringing us into the conversation so that they can control the revenue stream, and as consequently they keep us content to be really on the outside looking in rather than being on the inside making real transformative change, so that we can pass the torch to this young lady who is sitting next to you, Charmaine. I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Yes, Michael, it's the little ones that we're really striving to change a paradigm, for a significant paradigm. Dana, same question to you. You are many of us, not all of us, but many of us have some inkling of the historic challenges that tribes have had brought about from what happened with them, with the newcomers to the country. So, same to you, Dana. What does food injustice look like in the work that you're doing as a member of the original Americans?
Okay. Well, food systems for my tribe and then indigenous people all across the Americas have been disrupted for hundreds of years at this point. And I know that pre-contact, we had a really strong system that fed our people. And I don't say that we survived because we thrived, and we did really well. And our food system was, you walked out your house and your home or your place where you lived, and you went into your kitchen, wherever it was at, and you would gather your food, you might grow your food, you hunted, you fished, and you dug your roots or your berries or whatever food that was given to you as your people. And you collected that food, and you might have to move for it from season to season and trade with other people. There was different ways that we would be able to provide nutrition for our people. And everything we did do, we had to work for. I mean, if you were going to go hunting across the mountains, you had to build your tools. You had to do all the things. You didn't go to Walmart to get the twine to tie up your stuff onto your car. You know, you had to build everything down to the shoes you were putting on your feet. So there was a very important. There was so much work that it entailed with doing that kind of thing as a community, as a group of people. So you relied a lot on each other, and we did that. You know, we did that, and we did well, along with many other Indigenous people all across the, you know, both Americas. You know, and then you know, colonialism came and changes happened. Our food system was one of the things that was disrupted. So many things were disrupted, you know, with whether it's our education of our children, our land base, our, you know, sicknesses came that were not here before, laws came that didn't exist for us before, land ownership came, and that was a really bizarre, unthought of idea. I mean, how could you own this piece of land? I mean, it's been here long before I was ever here, and it's going to be here long after I'm gone. Just that concept of land ownership was really foreign to many. You know, so all these different foreign things came along, and different, you know, they took us from our traditional ways of living and our traditional cycles and placed us onto the reservations. That completely disrupted our food systems, you know, and then we became reliant on whatever the government provided. And this wasn't that long ago. This was like 1910, when the Dawes Act happened. I think it was the Dawes Act or the Allotment Act. So that's not that long ago in history that a lot of our food systems were disrupted. You know, that's in my grandmother's life, you know, and my dad's life. So we went from, my tribe were foragers and hunters, and that's how we got our food, and fishermen. So we would get our food in that way, you know, and then they kind of gathered us all up and put us on this plot of land. We were really fortunate. We lived someplace very beautiful, but you still can't get everything you need within the confines of the reservation boundaries. So we then became dependent on a system that was really foreign, including trade with the merchants. So we would go hunting and maybe take our furs in, and we'd go trade for different supplies, and learned how to get flour and whatever kinds of supplies came in from the Western world. And those weren't foods that were healthy for us. You know, then came along with the health disparities, diabetes, obesity, heart disease, because those were not foods that we didn't consume. You know, a lot of disease and sickness came from that, along with alcohol and alcoholism and the other things that come along with that. So the injustice really is about, you know, removing from a people stuff that kept them really healthy. You know, everything my grandmother had to do, she had to work for. And she was still, she was old enough or young enough, I guess, to have to depend more on the government for their foods and their commodities, or their rations, I guess you'd say. So that is really just the beginning of injustice. So they've got us all round up here on the reservation, and we have to go then become a consumer instead of people that have provided for themselves. And I say that, but we still have a lot of people who do their hunting, and they still do their gathering of foods. So there's kind of that mix that we have. My freezer is full of elk meat. I rarely have to buy protein. I have to buy chicken, and I have to buy pork, and if I want to buy beef, I go buy beef. Other than that, we eat a lot of elk and deer. You know, so that's still been passed on to me. You know, but there's some families who don't eat that anymore. There's some families who don't gather their berries that they get every season, or the roots that they get at this season, or whatever important other kinds of foods that they get. They've lost that connection from this food to that old food. So then what happens is we live in a food desert, just like a lot of us, and the abilities to get healthy foods or foods that are fresh is not that, it's harder to happen. I have to drive 17 miles one way to get to a store. And the food that gets to my store came from where Brenda's from, probably, and it's taken a long time to get here because we weren't the first stop. We might have been the last stop on that produce truck, you know, because they're going to go to the urban areas before they ever hit the reservation areas. So it was cheaper to buy stuff at the convenience stores or buy some really processed foods that are simple to eat and cheap. And simple to prepare. So many people became dependent on really non-nutritious foods that just made our health issues much worse. So now, you know, I think of food justice pretty similar to what food sovereignty is. Food sovereignty is people's right to, you know, just make decisions about their food system and grow their own food, bring in their own food, teach people how to grow, you know, gather their roots and their berries and go hunting and do all that kind of stuff. Make those important decisions for ourselves and not have them made for us. So when other people and government and leaders that be, powers that be, make decisions for us, that's an injustice, you know, to tell me that, no, you can't go gather your roots over there anymore, or no, you can't go pick those berries. That's injustice.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana. That was very powerful. So I'm going to throw out a question, and any of the panelists can start off answering it. So I asked, what does food injustice look like for you? But what we're trying to do with these discussions we're having is, how do we change the paradigm? What is needed to be done to change the injustices in the food systems that we're experiencing, that the communities and neighborhoods that we live in or serve, etc., are experiencing? How do we change that paradigm? Anybody who wants to start off?
Well, I'll start. I think that, again, we are talking about food justice, but we're also talking about climate justice, and we're talking about environmental justice. And so, just us is really who can solve the problem for us. These aren't artificially contrived, they are promoted, they have been created. When you start talking about change and what do we need to bring about change, I would dare say that there's many in this country that think there is no, I mean, if we look at recent politics and some of the pushback that we've seen on civil rights and every kind of progressive action that is called for addressing food insecurity, food justice, climate justice, you see that there's many who, again, many forces that are in place that say, no, we don't need to go forward, that there's nothing wrong with the way that this country has operated, and that it's been okay. So I think you have to really start with a beginning point to really determine, what is the elephant in the room. And I will throw it out, and that is white supremacy. Is that some of these institutions that believe that America is the land of the free only for a few select few, and that those of us who believe in wanting to look at a multicultural America that's made up of immigrants and folks that we welcome to America, the land of the free. It's been the civil rights movement that really helped develop the model of what democracy is. So we really have to not just think of it in the narrow scope of, again, this kind of linear approach, that as we find out that this is a multi-pronged, that we need to look at really addressing our school system in terms of who gets educated and who does not. And again, as the University of Arizona, and since you're one of the leader proponents of this, I would challenge you to really think in terms of what does equity look like, and that if we look at really trying to create an equitable America, where I use the language, let equity and inclusion be the seeds that fuel our nation's future, that then we will come to the food justice, the social justice, the environmental justice that many of us give rhetoric to. But I think it's time beyond going beyond the fanciful words and to really put together a practical agenda that moves us forward to bringing people who have been stranded on the sidelines, living the American nightmare. How do we bring everyone, lift everybody's boat in the marina, and we move forward to really focus upon a food focused future where all people have access for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the so-called, preamble to the Constitution.
Thank you, Michael. Dana, you're unmuted. Is that because you wanted to go next?
Oh, I didn't put myself on mute, so that's probably why I'm not muted, but I can go next. Wasn't prepared. Let me think of something quick.
Well, no problem, Dana. I
Okay.
didn't mean to put you. I thought you had unmuted yourself because you wanted to go next. Bill, I see you've
I can
unmuted.
go. Yeah, definitely appreciate Brother Michael's comments. And I think that's definitely the starting point. And I read a book recently called I think it was Food Town USA, and it was by Mark Winnie, and he was showing the movement of food movements in 7 cities throughout the United States, and what was consistent, like in all of the cities that he went to, from Boise, Idaho, to a small town, Louisiana, to Youngstown, Ohio, and these other places, is that there was this, to Michael's point, there was this kind of upscale green movement of microbrews and these very well established restaurants and that kind of thing that are buying local, and then on the other side of town, they were giving away free food. So we've got the food banks and other folks that are getting government funding to make sure that low income people get food. And I think therein lies the problem when we talk about food injustice and food sovereignty. And I think Dana made this point very well, that when you're dependent on just receiving food, it puts you in this backpedal, on this at this deficit of being able to provide for yourself. Now you're not even choosing, what you eat is being chosen for you. And Dana, thank you so much for that characterization. I'm gonna carry that with me, because in our context, I think about it because we're called on many times to provide emergency food distribution in community. Um, Institutions will reach out to us and say, well, you're sourcing from local farmers. We want the product from these local farmers to go into community. And while we're happy to do so, it's in my job description to do so. I recognize that us passing out boxes of produce isn't helping anybody long term. I mean, we're giving them some food that they can eat on, not even for an entire week, and everybody gets to declare victory. Oh, yeah, we're feeding people. But what are we doing to help people provide food for themselves going forward? And so when I think about the money that's being spent on just passing out food, that money really needs to be spent on building infrastructure, building or changing laws, changing zoning so that you can get more urban farms, getting more people putting their hands in the dirt, which is exactly what Michael's working on. The more people are working on providing food for themselves, the more empowered they are, and it has this overflow effect into other areas of their lives. And when you look at what's happening in this farm to school movement, so many schools now are putting in school gardens. Well, what happens when these kids who have said, well, I only eat Doritos, well, I only eat, Takis, whatever it is, now all of a sudden they grew their own cherry tomatoes. Now they develop this appreciation for food that they didn't have before. What is the equivalent of that for entire communities? And I think that's where the conversation's got to go. How does the funding go into helping communities learn how to provide for themselves again, like they used to do? And any effort that gets outside of that goes to the provision of food, but not the provision of opportunity to provide food for themselves is always going to fall short. And we're always going to end up back at this place. So that's where the funding has to be spent. And that's where the effort to me has to be.
I just want to add on to that, if we're all well intentioned, then I challenge us to be more intentional. We don't have to imagine what this looks like. We've seen it in history. We can go back to the Victory Garden movement, where it was patriotic to grow for schools and churches to grow food. That we need to be replicating that, building on that. What do they say? They say, give a man a fish, and teach a man how to fish. There is no long-term solution by giving away free food to people. Yes, I know hunger solutions is not the answer. That is continuing to perpetuate a broken food system where we devalue the food, and as where we say we're not really giving people healthy options. We're not lifting them up and out of poverty. So if we were well intentioned, let's examine that. What would that look like if the very young people that we want to see eating this food, to Bill's point, we're actually growing that food? And let's take it one step further. What if we were actually giving them remuneration for their efforts? What if we were able to aggregate all of that produce from all of those schools, all of those churches that are doing cookie and pie sales, turning our community only to get more and more obese? What if we change the format and really stop the madness and really started fresh? Let's imagine we're all time travelers. And if I don't know what your religious faith is, but let's say that the Garden of Eden is more than just a urban myth or a fairy tale. But let's just entertain the idea that if we could go back in time to the Garden of Eden and we were able to really get everyone to grow their food, that they would be physically more agile, better fit. You see rural farmers in their 80s that are in better health than urban residents in their 40s. That should be a signal to us all that we're going in the wrong direction. We're walking down the wrong path. So, but we looked at Roosevelt, who had the New Deal and came up with some social programs that I think that we should be emulating. One was the Victory Garden. One was the Conservation Corps. One was the WPA, where they were telling stories about the real America. Let's not just keep on playing patty cake, but let's bring this urban farm. And I never talk about urban farming in isolation. I talk about urban farming, local food production. Because I say that we will know equity when the products that sit on our big box stores are more reflective of the diversity of our community. Because a family recipe is a family business suffering from arrested development. So let's move forward, not only on the growing of the food, on that side of the equation, but let's really go beyond youth development. Let's go beyond community development to really focus on economic development, because the best career opportunity for an unemployed individual is a job or a career. And we can do that by really aggregating this produce and then creating a nominal revenue stream for any given provincial area by aggregating that produce, and in essence creating a co-op model that gives everybody a buy-in, a little skin in the game. And so now we're moving forward to really advance economics. I spent over 18 years working on Juneteenth, and then in 2010 I started Project Sweetie Pie, and I stopped working on Juneteenth because I realized that a community will only have a culture in shambles if it doesn't have an economic strong foundation. And we see that generation upon generation where our very community spirit, our community fabric is eroding and disintegrating right before our eyes with the influx of drugs and all of this, that we are at war, and that we need to get serious and quit playing games with ourselves so that we can create enterprise in our communities so that our young people can thrive and create families, a life of prosperity in the richest country on the planet.
I could go next, adding to what Michael and Bill
Sure.
are have spoken to. I think another really big piece that we need to make sure of is policy change, both at the local, state, and national level, and making sure that the individuals that are benefiting or are struggling from the current policies are at the table. So at the local level, why aren't our local farm workers at the town hall meetings? Why aren't we working to make these spaces accessible for them to join so that they can express from their own words what it is that they're experiencing? Um, in a perfect world, I wouldn't be the one having to advocate for the agriculture workers that I work with. In a perfect world, those individuals that I interface with should be able to go to the town hall meeting and talk about what barriers exist to them accessing healthcare and food. At the policy level, um, many individuals in the communities that I work in are not able to access food pantries and food banks. Why? Because to be able to get that emergency box for the month, they have to show a proof of Arizona ID. And not all of the individuals in our communities have a valid Arizona ID. And many of them um, just will go hungry because there is that barrier. And working with our local organizations to even get over that barrier, there's politics involved. And there's grant numbers that we have to meet that show that it's an Arizona resident that's receiving the emergency boxes. These are Arizona residents. They just don't have a valid Arizona license. Does that make them less worthy of having food at their table? Um, and these are then individuals that aren't able to have a voice in our community. And so in our community, with working with agriculture workers, starting a food garden isn't the most realistic thing for us to ask of them. Why? Because they're spending 14 hours a day growing produce and working in the fields. So asking them to spend their little free time coming home and continuing to do what they did the other 14 hours of the day, it's just not the most realistic thing. That's something that we have tried in our communities, and that's the feedback that we're getting from community members. It's they want a break from having to produce produce or take care of their own animals. to be able to eat, because that's what they're doing 6 days a week, 14 hours a day. And even their kids, even integrating our youth into our programs, there's barriers because in our communities, our youth is also working in the fields. When they're not in school, they're helping their parents because that's the only way that they're going to be able to pay their electricity, that they're going to be able to pay for their copay to go see a provider. So here in our communities, there's many barriers to doing programs, and that's why policy change really is the way that I see us being able to make change, because programs and doing education can really go so far if we don't have policy that can back us up.
Brenda, can I ask you to dig a little deeper? So, when Michael was talking about, he said, what should we be doing? What sort of collaboration? So, if you could create, if you had your druthers, what would you want to see in the community? Because I think you were spot on when you said, look, when you're an agricultural worker who's working 14, 16 hours a day, don't come talk to me about a community garden. So what would you want to see, Brenda, that would change this paradigm?
For those individuals to have access to the same produce, foods that we have. So building grocery stores closer to where individuals are living, having a mobile grocery store that can go out to communities where people can buy fresh fruit and vegetables. And for the food pantries that we do have in our local communities, to not add barriers to our community members so that anyone can go in and access those resources without a fear of retaliation or a fear of being outed on their immigration status.
Well, I was at Tufts University at a 500 or so food champions from around the country. I asked the question, Brenda, what are we going to do about the Farm Bill, since you're addressing policy? It was crickets in the room. And it was that nobody, not only did they not answer the question, it was as if I didn't ask the question. And for me, that was an epiphany. I realized that those who are growing the food don't have the bandwidth to really be in these rooms to address policy. Not only do after a 14-hour workday, you don't have the energy to grow a garden, you certainly don't have the energy to work on advocacy and policy change. So the question is then, what is the resolve to that issue? And the resolve to that issue for me was that I realized that Project Sweetie Pie could not be just solely an urban farm training program, that I needed to broaden the bandwidth so that I could bring advocates, educators. That's the whole crux of the matter now. We ask our growers to grow the food. We ask them to maintain the maintenance of the food. We ask them to harvest the food. And then we ask them to babysit the food at the marketplace. That is a Herculean effort that is unrealistic and unsustainable. And what we need to do, all of those across the savannah, we need to come together to expand the tent so that those of us who have the luxury or are not engaged in 14-hour growing food, that there's people in the community that can aid and abet our growers so that we can take some of that burden off of them, even if it means at the marketplace. How can we grow markets for them? How can we grow those workers that you're talking about that are trapped in a system that has them basically enslaved to poverty, how can we create other alternative pathways through education, through policy work? And if they don't have the bandwidth to do it, then it's incumbent on those of us in this panel to come together in collaboration to raise funds for educational pathways, to create new markets, to create new industries and distribution methods, to think about worker-owned co-ops so that people can come together and band together to build their own brighter futures. It is a dire picture if we were to look at things as they are, and certainly again one might fall under the illusion again that at least nobody has got chains on their legs, that slavery, as Juneteenth says, we've been emancipated. But I would question that, pushback that again, those folks that are trapped in a system that makes their quality of life miserable, that all either we are all what we're doing in the food system, but we also have to perceive of ourselves as abolitionists, no more, no less than the folks that Frederick Douglass's or those who fought to emancipate people from slavery. We must see ourselves also as modern day abolitionists, food fighters, freedom fighters who are intent on changing a system that is unfair and unjust. And it will not, the only thing that a big dog respects is a bigger dog. And so we have to really put our energies into creating alternative systems. Just us gardens.
Thank you, Michael.
I'd like to add that the model that we're using is the Victory Garden model. It came to the area 3 years ago, and we kind of indigenized it, and we kind of decided to call them Gardens for Life. And we started the first year they did them, we did 3 gardens, and then they met me and they called me extra. So then we added an extra garden, and I'm just a volunteer at this point. So we did it in the community I live in. So that was the first year, and I was just a volunteer community member, worked for the tribe in another job. And then the next year, at the end of that season, that's when Food Sovereignty Program really just started running. They needed a manager and they hired me to do this. So last year was our first formal year with these Garden for Life gardens. And we went from 4 gardens to 8 gardens and then back to 7 because one of them was unable to take off due to some environmental issues. And then this year we're back to 8 gardens. So this is going to be the third year of these Victory Gardens. Second year formally as under the Food Sovereignty. We're a partnership with these gardens that are around the reservation in 8 different communities, but collectively they only cover about 2 acres of land. And the goal behind these is to get people to learn how to garden and learn how to care for their foods, grow their foods, harvest them, preserve them, do all the kinds of things that my grandmother did. I mean, my grandmother was of Norwegian descent. You know, my Kootenai grandmother also had a garden and did her traditional gathering of the traditional foods along with the vegetables she learned to grow as well. So we're never going to go back to eating just our traditional foods. And I'm happy to say that because there's a lot of foods that I really enjoy that we didn't eat historically. You know, I really do enjoy eating broccoli and asparagus and other kinds of foods that we didn't eat. So, you know, if you can take the best of both worlds for us as Indigenous people, I think it's a lot better for us. And healthy and can really kind of change the pathways that we're going, you know, and get people thinking about healthy ways of eating and living, you know, getting your hands in the soil and growing something. I'm always in utter awe when I, you know, open up my jar of tomato sauce, tomatoes that I canned. Not only did I can them, I grew them and I planted the seed. From one little seed came all these other things. And it just gets me super excited about the food that I created. and grew and cared for, and then I harvested and then I canned, so then in 2 days ago, I used some of it for dinner, and that's empowering. And the more people we can get to be empowered with their own food system, whether it's growing your garden or taking those apples off of a tree that's just going to sit there and collect bears, because there's a lot of fruit trees out there that aren't even the food isn't even being harvested off of them. But I can get people to be excited about what their food system is and more in control of what it is. If I can I'm always excited when I can help somebody just feel confident enough to even grow a tomato plant or some onions or whatever that food is that I could get them to say, I did this. The more we do that, I think the better for the people. Now, where I live, it's pretty rural. We're widespread, cover a lot of Montana's big, and then this reservation's big, so it's kind of a large area. So getting people to kind of help themselves, but also help their neighbors is really important to me. And just giving them that confidence, because I think people are afraid they become consumers. You take the money you're given, whether it's a job or it's however you get your money, and then you go and you buy it. It's just this ongoing exchange that you're never ahead of. You're always about two bills behind. I think it's really important, to get people empowered, and part of the policy change, I think that's something to think about is why is the people that Brenda works with, she's probably getting food from miles away. Why can't most of us have the ability to grow foods all over this country, all over the United States. They have windows of opportunity. They can grow their own foods. We should be providing more foods from our own regional areas. Why are we not buying what we have a pretty good, Montana has long summer days. We have a short growing period, but we make up for it for our long daylights. This picture right here, that was probably taken at probably 9:30 a couple weeks ago. Now our sunlight is even later than that, so we have the ability to grow really good food, and it should be in our local stores or it should be at our local markets. Everybody, if you're in Minnesota, you should have a market there that you can know that food there was grown within 300 miles or 200 miles or whatever that radius is. I know I'm never going to grow oranges, so I'll be happy to take them off the truck, but we need to really think about all over the country how we can localize our food systems, and have those exchanges my grandma used to have, where someone had chickens and somebody else had goats and somebody else had cows and somebody else had this or that, and they would trade amongst each other, and that was a pretty good way to live. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that.
Thank you, Dana. Bill, I wanna follow up on something you said in some of your earlier remarks, where you talked about a belief system and the significance of that. When you were talking about that, I jotted down a note to myself to follow up with you that says, in changing the in attempting to change a paradigm, what happens when that belief system comes up smack against, for example, when the Biden administration came in and tried to address the huge inequity that had happened when grants and funding and loans were being made that predominantly white farmers got, and the Biden administration tried to change that. And what happened? White farmers sued them and said it was discriminatory. But what happens when that belief system comes up against a system that is committed to maintaining the status quo? Because isn't that part of what we have to address in changing the paradigm?
Absolutely. Um, it's always amazing to me how any effort to achieve equity in this country is seen as oppressive by those with privilege. It's just amazing. And you know, I had the common market has contracts in Texas and in Georgia to provide food to the food banks in those regions from quote socially disadvantaged growers. And socially disadvantaged was defined by the USDA as Black, brown, person of color, women owned, anybody who suffers from some historical disadvantage. And there was a court case recently in Texas that held a federal judge said it is racist to try to help anybody that's considered socially disadvantaged. It's racist to even use that term because it might have the tendency to provide a benefit to a person of color over a white man. And that's not what this country is built on. And while we might scratch our heads on that, laws are set up and systems are set up to protect the status quo and to protect the wealthy few. Every society has been set up that way. Whenever I'm talking to my peers and like, man, this has got to change. Well, when has it ever changed? And what society in the history of mankind has any system been set up to benefit everybody, not just those who are wealthy? And I think today, the times we're living in, is no different. What I would say to that is exactly what we're talking about on this panel discussion is how do the people decide what's going to happen moving forward? I have always believed that if the people will lead, the leaders will follow. And if the people that we're talking about no longer subscribe to the belief systems that the leadership of this country would advocate for, then it loses power. And it loses enough power that all of a sudden they don't have that capacity to control what we do. And so I really believe that it goes back to what we're talking about here. And Brenda, I wanted to circle back on something that you said, and I'm definitely sensitive to. I hadn't thought about agricultural workers who are spending the majority of their waking time working in fields, and the detriment that would be to say, okay, now go grow some food. Um, I do think though that when we talk about building grocery stores, because that's where I come from, that is a really, really difficult proposition because most grocery stores operate on razor thin profits and it takes very little to make them negative. And if you follow the news around the country, you see these community grocery stores open up and then a year later they close because they start with these great intentions. Everybody wants them there. They all make these declarations. We're going to buy local. We're going to support our local producers and all that. The problem is people have budgets and people want to pay as little as possible for food. It doesn't make them bad entities, it doesn't make them bad people. We all have a budget. And those two concepts come in conflict. But you did say something, Brenda, that I think is a way forward, and I'm a big advocate for this, is rather than building a grocery store and saying to everybody around there, hey, come to this brick and mortar, everybody find a way to get here to get this food. Take the food to the people. I think you're absolutely right. Mobile grocery stores can be done differently. They can be done better than they're being done now. And I am an advocate that we need to run now. I've thought about this model in urban settings. I haven't thought about it as much in rural, so this may not resonate, but we have a bus system. Everybody knows when the buses are coming. Everybody knows what stop they're going to every single day. Why can't we set up a similar system for food where each of the communities knows the bus that has food on it that's well stocked, that's fresh, that's priced as good as it's going to get, but it has the variety that I need, is going to be in my neighborhood every day at 4:30, and it's going to be there from 4:30 to 6:30. And maybe I'm not home for that, but maybe somebody else is. Maybe as a community, we decide it's your turn to be there to get the food for our neighborhood on that day. But that's where we start to seize that power. And it's not up to the larger corporations that are deciding where these mega structures are being built in areas where they feel like they can make the most money. We, the people, are deciding what that best route is going to look like, who's going to get the food and on what schedule, but it has to be done professionally, it has to be done consistently, and it has to be done sustainably.
Thank you, Bill. We're on the last 10 minutes of our time together, and I wanted to follow Michael's line to us. Imagine if, what if? So what's the 2 or 3 what ifs that you want us as a group to leave, and for those who are listening to hear? What's the what ifs that we will we think will be impactful in changing the paradigm to lead us to food justice? Michael,
Well,
you want to
I
start?
can, sure. Well, I want to begin first of all to say that we also need to move into this green new economy. We need to be cognizant of global warming and climate change and recognize that there's revenue streams that are coming out of the Inflation Reduction Act and the EPA, that now these big governmental agencies, there's a lot of pennies falling from heaven right now, but we're not prepared. We don't have our buckets ready to capture those pennies. And so, and we don't have necessarily the think tank and those who can write the grants and to be able to take on that task. And so I would challenge our academic institutions, our thought leaders, to really, number one, that they need to lead by example. Universities should be thinking in terms of, what about if some of your scholars actually came and worked with Bill, and that the dollars that they or came and worked with Dana, and in those dollars that come from tuition could be deployed justly and equally to some of our grassroots organizations, thus creating a revenue stream for them. Because we're talking about a food system that talks about from growing the food to distributing the food, and all of us are agents of change. It's kind of like in schools where the janitor, the bus driver, they are all educators in this just system. And so I think we need to look at the academic institutions where they need to move over. They need to be able to create pathways for experiential learning from internships and apprenticeships where they can come and work with grassroots organizations. That would deploy resources across the board. I think we need to look at the criminal justice system and really figure out how can we get those who have been the worst hurt and branded by society, coined menaces to society, and how can we move those men and women who have come out of the criminal justice system? How can we use the local food system as a platform to employ them, to educate them, and to lift them up and out of poverty? And then I think we need to also look at agriculture. Has really not, in the USDA, has not been our best friend. We've had to fight them tooth and nail. I think that they're torn between two lovers. They talk about local food production, but they're embedded with large corporate agriculture. Let's look at thinking about co-op structures. Land of Lakes is a co-op. Um, Land of Lakes is a co-op, and Kemp's Milk is a co-op. We need to be thinking about formulating specialty crop, locally engendered food enterprises that then we can aggregate and grow to scale the same way that, Bill is talking about, but we bring everybody from, I don't care if you grow one tomato or you're growing 100 tomatoes, that's up to you and your capacity, but let's build their knowledge, build their confidence, and build markets and revenue streams for them. And in that way, all boats rise. And so I think it's take calls for, as they say, rethink our drink. I think we really need to have some deep dive conversations how we all can come together to support and equity and food justice in America.
I'd
Michael?
like to add one thing. I think it's important to instill the need for people growing our food in our young people, because the average age of our growers is pretty old. If you look at the farmers that are around still, they're up in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And who's going to feed us in a couple of years? So I've been with my own grandkids, I talk to them about, you could be your own boss. You can grow food, and this could be your job. And they're little, they're like tweens. So to think of, help empower our young people to think about this as a career or something that they could do as they get older, because nobody's replacing those farmers. So what's going to happen in a decade or two?
Thank you, Dana. Next, Bill?
I would speak to the food is medicine programs that are going on now, and just kind of going back to the themes that we've been sharing on this panel discussion. Those food is health programs that we have participated in as well, have largely been force feeding patients who already have type 2 diabetes, other health markers, just giving them healthy food. Here, take this healthy food, or providing certain food for them to buy. I think we've got to work in some behavior change in that programming, where if a doctor says, hey, you got to change your diet, or you're going to die. And many of those folks run right out of the doctor's office. They find the first farmer's market. They go to the grocery store and say, just give me whatever you got. Many of them have no idea what they're doing there. But I think that prescription has got to include something more substantive than just change your diet. It's got to include some training, some linking up with another organization where they are learning how to grow, or they are learning something to sustain their lives and to sustain the lives of their families, just beyond getting food. Again, the free food is not going to solve that. There's got to be some behavior change and some education that goes with that.
Thank you, Bill. Brenda, any last thoughts from you?
Yeah, so when I think of what if, I think of what if our agricultural workers, farm workers had access to healthcare services, that then they were healthier, then they were living longer, healthier lives. What if our agricultural workers had access to healthy food? What implications would that mean on their health, their livelihood, and their children? And what then that means to the country as a whole. If we have healthier agriculture workers, then we're going to have access to more food on our table. We don't want a repeat of what happened in our grocery stores in 2020, 2021, where there was no one working the fields and our produce was going to waste. Which, if our agriculture workers are sick or are dying at a younger age, sadly, that is a reality that we might have to come face to face with, of not having people there to pick the food that we all need to survive.
You, Brenda, Bill, Dana, Michael. You've given us much to chew on, but we need to think about how and this is what, as I was listening to each of you share your perspectives, how do we join forces and collaborate, or who do we join forces with and collaborate? Who do we're coming up on some major political happenings in this country. And this conversation, for me, underscored the need to be really thoughtful in the kind of political leadership that we put in place, and that this might be an opportunity for us to be pushing and advocating for some of these system changes that we talked about, but also continuing the conversation with each other, because this was so helpful as I heard from the different perspectives, I think, as we all heard. So I want to thank you so much for giving us an hour and a half of your time, for sharing your thoughts and experience, your thoughts about the experiences you've had, the changes you want to see, the challenge of an unjust food system. Huge thank you to you all.
So Charmaine, we do have a few comments, a couple questions in the chat. If you don't mind, I can go ahead and read those. A person had responded to Brenda, wish there was some policy changes that would allow farm workers to purchase from the farms that they work in as a work benefit, wish they could purchase from the produce at affordable prices, and wish the farm workers were required by law to provide such benefits, or the farm owners were required to do those benefits. Another comment we have is, I've heard that there are no broken systems. Unfortunately, the system is working for someone or some few.
Wow.
And another one, farm workers should be able to buy directly from the farms they work in. Yes, wish the farm owners would set aside part of that produce for those workers. And that looks like what we've got some comments in there. Thank you, everybody, for participating with us today. There is going to be an evaluation, and I'm happy to say we do have another date coming up for part 3 in this series, Charmaine, and that is going to be on July 23rd. So once we get the rest of the information, everybody that attended today, and of course on the email list with National Reach Coalition, will be getting the emails of and being able to register. We just don't have the registration open yet because we want to confirm the panelists that will be on that as well on the 23rd. And let me see, I got another little message that popped up. Someone else is also saying thank you again. Charmaine, any final thoughts for you?
As always, Melanie, thank you for you and Chris providing the technical know-how and expertise that allows us to have this conversation. And again, for the amazing work each of our panelists are doing to make a difference. I salute you. Thank you. Let's continue to keep this conversation going with some real recommendations and suggestions about how we change this paradigm. I'm reminded of something I heard not so long ago, and I heard and I'm paraphrasing now, the master's house does not get dismantled by the master.
That's
Yes.
true.
Amen.
Again, thank you all.
So
Bye. Take care.
Brenda, Dana, Michael, Bill, and Charmaine, again, thank you for joining us today and for sharing your stories and for sharing your experiences. We greatly appreciate it here at the Arizona Telemedicine Program, Southwest Telehealth Resource Center, and being able to share it with our audience and our attendees. Thank you, everybody, and hope you have a great rest of the afternoon. We'll see you in July.
Thank you.
Tomorrow. Take
Bye,
care.
everyone.